If you had to pick a location in Tarkov that you wish you were better at fighting in, where would it be? For me, there are many locations where I personally struggle with getting good PvP engagements that end in me being victorious. With how complex the game is already, when you stack certain highly contested PvP zones on top of later game Tarkov and people looking for fights and having the gear to deal with those threats, it can become really chaotic when you engage in those fights. PvP in Tarkov as a whole can be really tricky and challenging to become even remotely decent at. I still suck, but every once in a while I have my moments where I make every right decision and or just hit all my shots. There are few and far enough between that it's kind of like a unicorn sighting, you know? But besides just improving at raw PvP, there are certain spots all across Tarkov that I would love to invest more time into and improving upon. 3 immediately come to my mind when I ask myself this question, so I figured I'd share them and see if anyone else feels the same way or have other spots where they want to get better at as well. Before we get to the main locations, I wanted to give a quick honorable mention to the mall on Interchange as a whole. I decided not to include it in the main 3 because considering the mall is the main and arguably only attraction on Interchange, it kind of feels like a cheap answer. It's kind of the whole map with the exception of the power station. Regardless, fighting in the mall can be really tough with the long sightlines combined with how damn dark the mall is as a whole. I'm always torn on whether or not I should go in with some kind of range or just a red dot for close quarters. Sure, I can do both with certain optics and mounts, but when you spend so much time switching back and forth between the two, you get blown up by someone you didn't even see in the first place. Most of the time though, I settle for some range, and that usually gets me killed because people push and have superior short-range fighting capabilities. It's usually a lose-lose, so I don't fight on that map as much as I can. Either way, it is a place where whenever I do go, I want to get better so the ragman tasks that need to get completed on Interchange can just become a lot easier. The location that I want to improve on, maybe the least out of the main 3, is the dorms on Customs. The only reason I say the least is because out of all the places I go to fight, I spend most of my time there. I still suck at it, but there are moments where I go big brain and shoot out a window and reposition or do, some crazy maneuver like that. It's one of the few places in Tarkov where the audio is sometimes really unreliable, so just trusting your own instincts and reaction times can prove to be both more effective and consistent if you're looking to win more fights and survive. Don't get me wrong, I like dorms as a concept, and having Rashala spawn there can also help attract the attention you need if you do want to improve at fighting. My personal biggest crutch with dorms are the 50-50s you find yourself in most of the time. For example, if you enter on the first floor and go up to the second from the main staircase, if you hear something but aren't exactly sure where it's coming from, you have to make a choice. Do you look right or left down the hallway? Yes, there's some cover on the left on the second floor, so it always makes more sense to peek the left side of the hallway first, but even then, someone could just get aggressive and run into you with their weapon ready. Dorms is a great example of what good decision making can do for someone who knows what they're doing. If they're confident and pay really close attention to all the audio cues that they're given, or not, and just, go off gut instinct, they can be really successful in dorms. It's a great place for PvP and why I want to improve, but to be fair, there are 2 other places that I feel my time could be better spent. Reserve as a whole is a tricky map, with no real flow or sense of direction in regards to where you need/should go to extract. It can be one of the more challenging maps to survive in. It feels kind of like a huge circle instead of something like Customs, where it's very obvious that you need to go from one side of the map to the other. Regardless, the main PvP attraction most people would agree on is D2 and everything it encompasses. With so many different ways to enter and exit, plenty of side rooms and hallways for flanks and repositions, it can be very overwhelming to figure out where any and all noise is coming from. Combine that with now, instead of a potential chance of running into Scab Boss, bumping into raiders not once, but twice, and you have a war zone that can get messy really fast. On top of that, it's dark, like really dark. Even when the power in D2 is on, the little lights that illuminate the hallways and main room at large don't provide enough light to really see what's going on most of the time. So it ends up turning into a flashlight show where everyone just flings a corner and prays that they hit the head. On top of that, D2 is certainly one of the more attractive locations for player scavs to come out and interrupt the action, making the chaos another layer deep. I find that out of all the hotspots currently we have with raw PvP takes place, D2 is by far the location where it could have the most bodies alive in one location at the same time. It could be wise to even just lay low and let everyone else do the fighting for you, but then again, we're trying to get better at fighting, not necessarily just get loot. So that's antithetical to the point of this video, but a viable strategy nonetheless. For actual improvements though, the only thing I've tried to incorporate whenever I find myself down in D2 is to heavily prioritize positional advantages, making use of all the different ways to enter and exit D2. You really have a lot of freedom to move around underground if you know where you're going and how all the different pathways connect to one another. You can take people for some surprising chases and surprise them when they least expect it. Overall, D2 is a chaotic Thunderdome that can be one of the most lucrative locations to loot, should everything go according to whatever plan you come up with, and definitely a place that I want to experiment with more and see what happens. I've had success in the past, so I'm eager to try and improve how I fight underground. And the one location that I wish I was better at more than anywhere else in Tarkov has to be the resort on Shoreline. Very similar to D2 in how you navigate it and the overall feel of the spot. I remember going to the resort way back in the day for the first time. It was crazy, checking every single room to make sure it was all clear before going wherever I needed to in order to get a task done. The resort on paper is one of the coolest locations to walk into and clear slowly and be all tactical. But in reality, again, like D2, it's a Thunderdome that is there for the most geared players to go and duke it out for pretty much a winners-take-all situation. And unlike D2, it's rare to find yourself against other PMCs and player scavs at the same time. Not too many people player scav on Shoreline for one, but to run into the resort is another thing entirely. It certainly happens, but the odds of you finding yourself in the resort to run into scavs is rare. But the resort has one distinction. It's all primarily very close quarters, even more so than dorms. Because while there are hallways that having range can be really effective to look from one end to the other, the fighting ultimately ends up happening on the ground levels and the staircases that separate the floors, which has notoriously had some of the worst audio localization on any location in Tarkov, so that's kind of out of the question. But it really boils down to having good reflexes and reaction speeds. And again, I've said this before, but being the aggressor is these kinds of situations truly is a boon, making everyone have to react to you instead of the other way around. You never want to be caught with your hand in your pants, especially in the resort. The nice thing about it is that while it's very vertically focused, having 3 floors, there are many different ways to move up and down without being very obvious and one-dimensional. Multiple staircases on each wing and some holes in the flooring so you can get from a higher to lower level very quickly. Alongside that, there are a few spots with like audio checks, basically places where you're gonna make noise whether you want to or not, which I find really interesting. My main issue with the resort is the lack of reliable audio. It sucks so much thinking someone's on your floor only to swing a corner and have them be either above or below you, especially if they didn't know you were there in the first place. But I think Resort is one of the places where you can kind of just have to say fuck it and go full savage mode and just hunt people down. It'll work sometimes, and other times you might just run into a squad and die instantly. But that's, kind of the fun of it, honestly. Tarkov, while not being primarily focused on the PvP at its core, has enough mechanics and locations that are interesting that people want to engage with these systems and become the best they can be. And that goes for myself as well. But it's a long journey of trying to get better at these spots, on top of the rest of the maps and the game as a whole in general. Hopefully, as more of the important and game-changing mechanics get introduced like the advanced armor hitboxes, we will see a large shift in how people approach combat in the game and the potentially many new ways players discover successful ways of being in combat and fighting each other. So I hope that over time, as changes come, we see a huge slew of new ways to engage with Tarkov with different calibers and guns and strategies instead of just holding W and running at people. It works for now, but fingers crossed for me personally that I hope it goes away and we get some really interesting and diverse ways of fighting each other and shooting each other in the face. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I hope to see you in future ones.